My name is Selena Brooks. I am 47 years old, and last night I was seated beside a trash alcove at my cousin's engagement dinner. They called it the overflow table. It was not in the main dining area, not even under the terrace tent with the heaters and candlelit tables. Mine was wedged outside next to a plastic partition behind which servers scraped plates into gray bins. From where I sat, I could hear the scrape of cutlery against ceramic and the rhythmic clang of a swinging staff door. I could smell discarded lemon rinds and cocktail shrimp long before I saw a single menu. And yet I had been formally invited. The envelope arrived 3 weeks ago. Thick cardstock copper embossing my name written in looping calligraphy that had been traced but not felt. Dear Selena, it began, we would be honored to have you join us for Clarissa and Andrew's engagement celebration at La Belle Marais. That was the first irony. I had once helped finance the construction of La Belle Marais back when it was just a blueprint and a coastal permit. Back before Clarissa's mother asked me to take some space from the family for being, as she put it, too severe in public settings. Now, I was invited back. Not as a host, not even as a full guest, just as a tolerable presence. The maitre d' had hesitated when reading the chart. He blinked at my name, then looked at the thin folding table near the railing and said, "Ah, yes. Right this way." He didn't apologize. I didn't ask. I sat where I was told. My chair rocked slightly on the uneven patio stone. The linen on my table didn't match the others. It was thinner, more yellowed. There were no fresh flowers in the centerpiece, only a leftover votive candle with a burned rim and half-melted wick. I kept my purse in my lap because there was nowhere else to rest it. Every other woman had their bags hanging from polished brass hooks under the main tables. But I was not in the room. I was near it. When the first champagne was poured, I could hear the laughter echo from inside. Clarissa had just walked in. I watched her reflection in the glass doors, ivory jumpsuit perfect waves, the kind of gleam that came from curated lighting and being adored. She had always been good at being adored. I used to change her diapers. I once held her through an asthma attack when no one else was home. But time is not a bank. Some investments never mature. No one greeted me. Some passed by and nodded vaguely, others looked through me as if I were part of the decor. The only person who made eye contact for more than 2 seconds was a server in a pressed black apron. He looked about 30 with a sharp jawline and kind eyes. He stopped in front of me with a linen napkin in one hand and a water jug in the other. Then something changed in his expression. He leaned in, and quietly, reverently, he said, "Welcome back, Miss Brooks. It's an honor to serve you again." His voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet enough not to be heard by the couple sitting nearest the glass doors, Clarissa's future in-laws, I presumed. They tilted their heads just slightly, not enough to address me, but enough to wonder why a waiter would speak to me that way. I gave him a small smile. Nothing more. He placed the napkin across my lap, as if I were seated at the head table, and gently filled my glass. "Still sparkling?" he asked. I nodded. He nodded back. Then he stepped away. That was the first moment I felt seen. 12 years ago, I had walked out of this very restaurant during a shareholder dispute, one that took my name off the legal paperwork, but not off the blueprints. I had been young, brilliant, and too proud. And I had trusted people who thought ownership was louder than legacy. I never came back. Until tonight. When I RSVP'd, I hadn't known the dinner would be held at La Belle Marais. The location had been listed on a digital RSVP site, small font, one of several options Clarissa's parents were considering. I hadn't thought twice. I wasn't planning on attending until I saw a last-minute update, venue confirmed. And below it, those 3 words, La Belle Marais. Something inside me wanted to see it again. Not to stir old memories. Just to see what had grown from the bones I once laid down. So I came. I wore a navy blue wrap dress I had tailored myself from repurposed silk. It wasn't new, but it was elegant. It had belonged to my mother, and the hem still held the scent of cedar from her closet. I had tied my hair back, wore pearl earrings, and arrived precisely on time, and they put me beside the trash. Not because they forgot who I was, but because they remembered and preferred that I stayed forgotten. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the glass of the restaurant caught fire with amber and rose gold. Candles were lit. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. And inside that curated bubble, my family celebrated themselves, while I sat in the shadow of the very thing they had erased me from. But not everyone had forgotten. Not everyone believed what they were told. The man who served me water had recognized something that couldn't be deleted from a guest list. Something that wasn't loud, but lasting. And something told me he wasn't the only one. Have you ever been excluded in a room you helped build just because they wanted your silence more than your story? Tell me below. You are not alone. I watched them toast without me. Inside the glass doors, Clarissa's mother raised her champagne flute and clinked it against her husband's. Her voice carried just enough for the patio to catch. To the future, Mr. and Mrs. Dalton, may they continue our family's legacy with grace and better judgment. The second half wasn't for the room. It was for me. I had heard versions of that my whole life. In their eyes, I was always the one who stood slightly outside the frame, too serious, too driven, too unmarried. They admired women who smiled with their whole faces, laughed on cue, bent easily. I never did. I was taught to be precise, to listen more than I spoke. But somehow, I became the cautionary tale they whispered about across table linens and sparkling stemware. The wind nudged a napkin off a nearby table. It fluttered into my lap like a white flag from someone braver. I folded it, set it aside, and took a sip of water as I watched the celebration from the edge of it. From where I sat, every laugh sounded slightly rehearsed. Marco, the waiter, who had recognized me earlier, returned. This time, he carried a silver tray and wore a more formal tone in his posture. He stopped at my table and leaned slightly. "I didn't know it would be tonight," he murmured, eyes flicking toward the interior. "If someone had told me—" His voice trailed off like he was trying to protect me from something that had already happened. I offered him a calm smile. "You don't owe me anything." His shoulders relaxed just a bit. Then he glanced at the covered dish on the tray. "They took your name off the menu," he said quietly, "but not the risotto." I blinked. That was unexpected. My risotto was still being served. "They renamed it," he continued, "but the prep sheet still calls it Selena's style. Chef never changed it." My throat tightened, not from pride, but something deeper. Grief, maybe, or memory. 12 years ago, I created that dish with the head chef in a back kitchen over dozens of trials. Saffron corn and Dungeness crab folded into cream. It was the first recipe I ever put on a public menu. I had watched it rise, gain attention land in magazines, and then vanish after I left. From inside, I heard someone say, "Clarissa told me he works in finance, but she really just meant he has a trust fund." The kind of gossip that smiles with teeth. Another round of laughter followed. Marco shifted. "Would you like the risotto?" I nodded. He turned to go, but paused when a figure stepped into the doorway. Coral satin, stiff smile. Marla, my aunt, Clarissa's mother. The one who once told me I was too ambitious for polite company. She spotted me and walked toward the patio holding a wineglass with careful grace. "Selena," she greeted, her voice like glass on porcelain. "I didn't realize you had arrived already." I offered a neutral, "I've been here a while." Her eyes scanned my table, the folding one with a wobbly leg. No flowers, No brass hooks for bags. Oh, she said as if noticing it for the first time. Well, space gets tight at these things. You know how it is. I looked straight at her. I was on time. She gave a smile that said nothing. We had so many last-minute confirmations, but I told them you were family. I made sure you were included. Family. A word she wore like perfume light performative gone by morning. She took another sip and leaned in. Clarissa was surprised you RSVP'd. She thought you preferred to skip these kinds of events. I didn't answer. She continued. You know, after everything with the restaurant, we assumed you'd moved on. Her tone was casual, almost bored. You look healthy. That word again. Not beautiful, not graceful, just healthy. A sterile compliment for someone you expected to crumble. Before I could speak, Marco returned with the risotto, carefully placing it in front of me. He froze when he noticed Marla. His professional smile faded for a split second. She raised an eyebrow at the dish. Still serving that old recipe, Marco gave her a look that was respectful, but distant. Some recipes outlive names. Then he turned and walked away. Marla laughed lightly. They've always been loyal here. Sometimes too loyal. She swirled her wine, watching me. I heard you sold your shares. I did. To the Langstons, I let the silence answer. Her lips parted for a second, as if to ask more, then closed. Interesting choice? I tilted my head. Not really. They were the only ones who didn't ask me to vanish. She looked out toward the ocean, nodding once as if pretending to understand. Then, with the grace of a woman trained to exit before rejection, she said, Well, enjoy the risotto, and disappeared behind the glass. I took my first bite. Creamy warm, perfectly balanced, exactly as I remembered. It was still mine, even if no one here would admit it. They could rename it, replate it, fold it into someone else's legacy, but the flavor was still mine. And it still lingered. Across the patio, the light caught the rim of my glass, just as a new bottle of champagne popped inside. Laughter rose again. Music swelled. But here, where the terrace ended and the service alley began, I sat alone, eating the dish they tried to erase, but couldn't quite forget. Some legacies don't need your name on the menu to be remembered. The conversation behind the glass doors was just loud enough for me to hear. It was Clarissa's fiancé's younger sister, Sloane, a girl I remembered as all charm and curated carelessness. I swear, she said between sips of rosé, when I saw that shawl, I thought the staff had run out of napkins. She laughed too loudly, clearly for an audience. Someone else chuckled. Then came the comment that quieted them all. She always did dress like she was still waiting for her debut, just 20 years too late. They were talking about me. The shawl was silk, midnight blue embroidered by hand passed down from my mother. I wore it draped around my shoulders, its corners knotted gently at my collarbone. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. But it was dignified, and they knew that. Mockery is rarely about clothes. It's about the person they cannot place, the one who reminds them of a story they tried to rewrite. I did not react. That would have pleased them too much. Instead, I adjusted the shawl, let it fall gracefully down my arm, and lifted my water glass. The citrus slice at the bottom shimmered in the early evening light. Across the table, Marco reappeared, no tray this time, just a folded napkin and a small dish. It was a palate cleanser, blood orange sorbet in a chilled silver bowl garnished with a single mint leaf. For you, he said simply. Then, after a pause, from the chef. I looked at him. Did he know I was here? Marco hesitated. He hoped. That word again, hope. It had become such a distant thing for me, the way sunlight still touches a window long after the room has gone cold. I dipped my spoon into the sorbet and took a bite. Clean, cold, sharp. A reset. Just as I finished, I noticed movement near the far side of the terrace. A figure stepped out, not a server, not a guest. He wore no apron, no tie. Just a navy blazer open collar and a face I hadn't seen in over a decade. Robert Moreno, the owner. The man who once sat across from me at a folding table just like this one, arguing over whether oyster shells or beach glass should line the garden wall. He had always been stubborn, particular, allergic to change. And yet here he was, walking toward me with the look of someone finally ready to correct a very old mistake. The staff parted for him subtly. A few guests glanced up, then backed down quickly. Robert walked past the hedge of potted palms, stopped just short of my table, and gave a slight nod. "Selena," he said, his voice steadier than I remembered. "Welcome back." I looked up at him, the breeze tugging gently at the hem of my shawl. "You're still here." His lips curved into a faint smile. "Some of us don't let go as easily." I didn't reply. Not yet. I wanted to see where he was going with this. "I saw your name on the event list yesterday," he continued, "and told Chef Andre to be ready, just in case." He gestured toward the sorbet. "I hope it's still to your taste." "It is." We stood in a soft silence. Around us, conversations resumed. Wine glasses clinked. The terrace hummed with curated joy. But here, just beyond its glow, something older was settling into place. Robert reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Not white, not copper-trimmed, but deep green, sealed with the restaurant's original crest, one that had long been removed from menus and signage. "I've been meaning to return this," he said, placing it on the table. "It was your last design file. We found it when we changed offices. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out." I stared at the envelope. That crest, I had drawn it on a napkin one late night during construction, when branding was just a word we tossed around. The original seal had an olive branch woven through a stylized letter M. It was meant to be our quiet nod to peace, to starting again. They dropped it the week after I left. Robert cleared his throat. "I know we didn't part well, and I know this family hasn't made it easy." His eyes drifted toward the terrace where Marla was now laughing with someone in pearls. "But you should know. This place remembers you. The staff, the kitchen, the floorboards. None of us ever forgot." I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not pride, just an old ache turning into something softer. Before I could speak, Marco returned with a fresh cloth and a pair of wine glasses. Robert nodded toward him. "Would you please send over the 2011 Merlot for Miss Brooks?" Marco smiled, already decanting. And just like that, Robert stepped back. No announcement, no apology, just presence. As he walked away, a hush followed him, like the room didn't know what they had just witnessed, but understood it mattered. Clarissa turned her head. Her brows drew together slightly the way they used to when she was 6, and someone else got the last piece of cake. Marla's smile faltered. Sloane looked confused. And yet no one asked me anything? I sat alone again, but not unseen. The envelope lay on the table, its crest glinting faintly under the patio lights. My sorbet dish was now empty. A folded napkin rested beside it, freshly placed. The wine would arrive soon. In a room where they had tried to minimize me with snide comments about silk and age, a man I once knew had stood beside me with no need for volume. I didn't need to be applauded. I just needed to be remembered correctly. The check came without asking. Folded neatly inside a leather folio, it appeared on my table, just as the sun dipped below the hilltops. No ceremony, no gesture, just a quiet arrival, like a whisper with intent. I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. No one else had received one. Not the cousins beside the floral archway. Not the future in-laws still debating Burgundy versus Bordeaux. Certainly not Clarissa, who now stood center terrace surrounded by toasts and cameras, her arm tucked into Andrew's like a trophy on loan. But at my table, the forgotten edge of the restaurant beside the staff's cigarette break corner, I had been served a bill. Marco did not bring it. That was telling. The server this time was younger new. She didn't meet my eyes. She simply placed the folio down with a mumbled, "Whenever you're ready," then disappeared before I could respond. I flipped it open. No greeting, no note. Just a printed receipt for the risotto, the sorbet, and a standard service charge. $168. No gratuity line. No mention of who had approved it. It wasn't the amount that stung. It was the assumption that I would sit, eat quietly, and pay for a meal in the restaurant I once helped build. That even here at a family event, under the glow of candles, I had personally helped choose. A decade ago, I was just a seat to fill. A plate to charge. I closed the folio slowly and set it beside my water glass. The ice had long melted. The lemon slice had sunk. Somewhere inside, someone called for a group photo. Another person trilled Clarissa hold the flowers higher. I didn't move. I had no intention of leaving just yet. A few minutes later, Marco returned, not with another course, but with a crisp linen towel over one arm. He caught sight of the folio immediately. His jaw stiffened. Then without a word, he stepped forward, picked it up, opened it, and read the receipt. His eyes darkened. "I didn't approve this," he said under his breath. I kept my tone measured. "I didn't think you did." He stood still for a moment, staring at the slip of paper, as if it had insulted him personally. Then, in one precise motion, he folded the receipt, tore it in half, and placed both pieces into his apron pocket. The folio now empty, he laid face down on my plate and pressed it flat with his palm, like closing a book that should never have been opened. "It's handled," he said softly. I looked at him. "You'll get questions." "I'm used to them," he replied, and for a second, I saw something in his face that I recognized, a quiet defiance. The kind that doesn't raise its voice. The kind that stays long after the music fades. Before he left, he leaned in once more. "The chef would like to send out something else. He said it was always your favorite." I didn't have to ask what it was. 2 courses later, it arrived. A single poached pear steeped in cinnamon and red wine perched over crème anglaise, garnished with toasted hazelnuts and a shard of caramelized sugar. I hadn't tasted it since my last night at La Belle Marais. Back then, it was still in development, still imperfect. But now, it was flawless. I took one bite and set my fork down. It was never about the check. It was about dignity, about presence, about not shrinking when someone tries to hand you the bill for something they built on your back. I didn't glance toward the main tables. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes now and then, curious, confused. The waiter who kept returning to my table. The envelope with the green crest. The owner's appearance. These were not part of their plan. Their narrative was simple. Selena, the estranged cousin, shows up, eats alone, then fades. But I hadn't faded, and I was no longer eating alone. After dessert, Marco brought one final item to my table. A white envelope unsealed. Inside was a handwritten note, neat and deliberate, "Miss Brooks. For your role in the vision, the space and the soul of La Belle Marais, thank you. Please consider this an invitation to return whenever you wish. Your table is always set." There was no signature beyond that letter, but I knew who it was. Chef Andre. He never liked formalities. I tucked the note into my clutch and stood slowly, letting my chair scrape gently against the patio stones. Across the terrace, Laughter echoed like glass, beautiful, brittle, and always one note too high. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't stop for Clarissa or Marla or the dozen faces who hadn't so much as waved. But as I reached the archway leading to the parking lot, a voice called softly. Miss Brooks, I turned. It was the young server, the one who had brought the bill. She looked flustered, apologetic. I didn't know. They just told me. I stopped her with a look that held no anger, only clarity. Next time, I said gently, ask. Then I walked into the night. I had almost forgotten about the mural. It was tucked into the far east corner of the restaurant, away from the main dining terrace, past a curved hallway most guests never noticed. But I had passed it as I left. My heels echoed softly against the polished stone, the scent of sea salt and warm pear trailing behind me, when I saw it untouched, unlit, but still standing. 7 panels arranged like pages of a half-closed book. A bloom of abstract coastal brushstrokes, pearl ash, slate blue, and coral. Each line had been mine. 12 years ago, I sketched the concept for that wall on the back of a vendor invoice. Back when La Belle Marais was still plaster and pipe dreams. I had fought to preserve that space from being turned into a coat closet. Light should have places to rest, I told Robert at the time. Give it a wall that listens. He thought I was being poetic. I was just trying to give the room a soul. And now, after everything, the mural remained. No brass plaque. No signature. No one at tonight's dinner would have known it came from me. But it hadn't been painted over. Not once. The brushwork still held its texture. My initials tucked into the lower corner, barely visible, had not been scrubbed out. That was enough. I stood there a moment longer than I meant to. The hallway was quiet, lit only by indirect sconces, soft halos against limestone. The laughter from the engagement party had faded, or maybe I had simply stopped hearing it. For a moment, it felt like the restaurant was holding its breath. And I let it. Because while the main dining room had forgotten me, this part of the building remembered. And it was mine. That mural was just one of dozens of touches I had once designed into the bones of La Belle Marais. The curved beams over the entryway, I chose them. The terrazzo floor pattern that spiraled gently toward the host stand, I sketched it on a coffee napkin after a night of insomnia. The lanterns hanging from iron brackets on the patio, each one engraved with different constellations, had been sourced from a metalworker I met during a trip to Santa Fe. He didn't speak much English, but he understood the weight of quiet beauty. I gave pieces of myself to this place before anyone believed it would be more than a rich man's hobby. And in the end, I had walked away without a title, without a plaque, without a chair at the table. That was the revenge of people like Marla, who don't raise their voices but rewrite history by removing your name from the story. As I made my way toward the exit, I heard my name faint and uncertain. Selena. It was Clarissa. I turned slowly. She stood near the host stand, holding a champagne flute that had already gone flat. Her hair had started to wilt beneath the soft coastal air, and her eyes, while wide and painted, looked unsure. For a second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to braid my hair while I read spreadsheets at the kitchen table. I didn't know you were here, she said softly, approaching with careful steps. No one told me. I RSVP'd, I replied. She nodded almost to herself. You didn't come to my graduation brunch, or to the winter gala last year. I wasn't invited to either. That made her pause. Oh, I thought Mom, she didn't. Clarissa glanced around, suddenly aware of how close we were to the entrance. A few staff members passed by discreetly. Someone behind the desk pretended not to listen. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking ever so slightly. I didn't mean for you to be seated wherever they put you. I didn't handle the arrangements. I would have said something. I let that sit between us for a moment. Not to punish her, but because too often, women like me are rushed into forgiveness before the weight of the damage is even acknowledged. "Did you design the mural?" she asked, gesturing behind me toward the curved hall. "Yes. I thought it looked like your work." That made something shift in my chest. A small thing, but real. "I used to sit in front of it during finals week," she added. "It made the room feel like it understood me." I wanted to believe her, and maybe I did, but belief doesn't erase a decade of erasure. "I'm glad you came," she said at last. "Even if it wasn't perfect." "I didn't come for perfect," I replied. "I came for peace." Clarissa blinked. "Did you find it?" I glanced back once more toward the hallway, the mural still waiting, the lantern still lit, and then looked out toward the night. "Yes," I said, "in parts." She smiled, thin and unsure, then gave a small nod before stepping aside to let me pass. No hug, no pose for photos, just the space I had earned. I walked out into the cool Santa Barbara night, the air wrapped in salt and sagebrush, and slipped the folded green crest envelope deeper into my bag. They had mocked my dress. They had erased my name, but the mural still stood. The lights still glowed in the pattern I had placed, and somewhere inside, beneath the laughter and linen and catered legacy, my fingerprints had never been wiped clean. They never said my name, but I knew they were talking about me. I had returned to the valet stand, waiting under a heater that hummed softly above my head, when I overheard them, two men in matching navy blazers, glasses of scotch in hand, lingering near the bar entrance. Their words floated through the air like smoke, careless and cutting. "Is that her one?" murmured. "The one who used to be engaged to Robert Moreno." His friend chuckled. "God, that was ages ago. Didn't she sue him? Or the restaurant? Something dramatic." "I heard she stormed out over tile colors and never came back." "Sounds about right. Always had that bitter energy. They said it the way some people talk about expired wine, something once valued, now spoiled. And they didn't lower their voices, because women like me in their eyes are not worth whispering about." I stood perfectly still. I had expected versions of this, the revised history, the half-truths turned entertainment. After all, what is a woman's ambition, if not something to be rebranded as instability? They didn't know the truth. I had walked away from Robert not because of tile colors, but because of lies written into contracts, promises broken behind closed doors, and a meeting where I was asked directly to take a smaller equity share to keep optics clean. I hadn't sued him. I hadn't needed to. My silence had been expensive enough. And yet here I was, 15 feet away from the same man who once called me the architect of his dreams, now reduced to a cocktail party anecdote. I turned, slightly prepared to leave without a word, when the kitchen door swung open, and out stepped Chef Andre. He wasn't wearing his full whites, just the jacket unbuttoned at the collar sleeves pushed to his elbows. His apron was stained with sauce and sea salt. He moved with the unhurried rhythm of someone who earned the right not to rush. He spotted me instantly and changed direction. The murmuring men noticed him too, straightened slightly. Andre had that effect. He wasn't loud, but everyone respected him. He was the heart of La Belle Marée, fiercely private, deeply loyal, and impossible to impress. And yet his feet carried him straight toward me. "Miss Brooks," he said, his French accent soft but unmistakable. "You stayed longer than I thought." I smiled. The poached pear was hard to leave. He nodded once, then pulled a folded cloth from his pocket and wiped his hands. "I saw the folio. It will not happen again." "I know," I replied. "Marco already handled it." His eyes flicked toward the terrace, then back to me. "I've kept the risotto on the menu. No one knows that it's yours. But I do. And I teach the new staff to treat it the same way you taught me, gently with no shortcuts." There was nothing performative in his voice. No flattery. Just a man stating fact. Before I could respond, one of the men near the bar called out with a forced cheer. "Hey, chef, great food tonight. That crab thing killer?" Andre didn't turn. He didn't respond. He looked only at me and asked, "Will you walk with me?" I nodded. We moved slowly down the side path toward the herb garden tucked behind a low stone wall. It was darker there, lit only by the moon and the glow of the kitchen window. I used to come here during long nights to clear my head. The rosemary bushes had grown thicker. The lavender now bloomed year-round. Someone had been tending to them. "I heard what they said," Andre murmured. "So did I. They are not the story. I know," I said, "but they think they are." He stopped beside a wooden bench, brushed off a few leaves, and gestured for me to sit. I did. He remained standing. "I remember the night you walked out," he said quietly. "You looked at the blueprints on the table, then looked at Robert like he was a stranger. And you didn't cry. You just said, 'Then let it be yours,' and left. It was the only power I had left." "You had more than you knew," he replied. "I waited 6 months for you to return. When you didn't, I stayed. Not for him. For the kitchen. For what you started." I didn't know what to say. Those words, not dramatic, not grand, landed with more weight than any toast I had heard all evening. "I want you to see something," he added. He pulled a folded menu from his jacket pocket. The real one, not the guest version. The kitchen's copy, worn and laminated, smudged with ink and oil. He flipped to the risotto section and pointed. "Risotto SB Saffron Corn Dungeness Crab." I stared at the initials. "They told me to rename it when you left." "I never did. I just hid the letters in plain sight. Anyone who's been here long enough knows." I felt my throat tighten. "Legacy is not always loud, Miss Brooks," he said. "But it is very hard to erase." For the first time that evening, I felt something settle inside me. Not vindication, not even peace. Just the quiet knowledge that while the room had tried to forget me, the roots I planted had not. He handed me the menu. "For keeps," he smiled. "For home." As we returned to the main path, the men near the bar had disappeared. Their drinks left half-finished, but their stories replaced. Because someone had walked out, and it wasn't me. When I returned to the terrace, the mood had shifted. The final course had been served. Glasses were full again. The playlist had changed from soft jazz to something more upbeat, string covers of popular songs, the kind that feels festive without pulling focus. Clarissa stood at the head table, arms gently wrapped around Andrew's, her cheek flushed from wine and attention. A photographer circled the edge, snapping candids no one had asked for, but everyone pretended to enjoy. I stayed just beyond the main entrance. No longer seated, but not yet gone. I wasn't ready to leave, not before the toast. Marla tapped her dessert spoon against a crystal flute. A soft ring, high and hollow, cut through the background music. She rose slowly with all the grace of a practiced hostess and turned toward the crowd. "I just want to say," she began, "how proud we are tonight. Clarissa and Andrew. Your love is joyful, dignified, and full of promise. That's all we could ever hope for." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She gestured toward the servers, who began pouring more champagne. "And I think I speak for all of us when I say—" Marla paused, her smile tightening. "This is what family looks like when we do things right." A few people clapped. I didn't move. She went on about unity, about new beginnings, about the privilege of legacy. I watched Clarissa glance down, once her fingers tracing the bass of her flute. Maybe she felt something. Maybe not. When Marla finished, Andrew stood. His voice was confident but careful. "To my future wife," he said, raising his glass. "Thank you for choosing me. and thank you all of you for being part of this moment." He didn't look toward me. He hadn't all night. The toast echoed around the terrace. The clinking of glasses filled the air. Waiters moved among the tables, topping off drinks with a practiced flick of the wrist. I stayed in the shadows until the lights dimmed. It was almost imperceptible at first, just a soft drop in the intensity of the overhead lanterns. Then the terrace lights flickered, once paused, and reset to a new mode. Warmer, deeper. The kind of setting meant for transitions. People looked up. A few whispered to each other. It wasn't dramatic, no spotlight, no announcement. Just a shift. And in that breath of uncertainty, the music changed. A single cello note, long and low, began to play. Then came the piano. The opening bars were unmistakable to me, though likely forgotten by everyone else. It was Debussy, Clair de Lune. The song I used to play after hours in the restaurant long before it opened. There had once been an upright piano near the back hall, where staff would gather late at night trading stories over wine and burnt espresso. This piece was the one I returned to again and again. Gentle, mournful, quietly powerful. Now it echoed through the terrace like a memory. People fell quiet. Clarissa looked around, uncertain. Andrew said something to her, but she didn't respond. Marla's smile wavered. And then something small but deliberate happened. A single lantern, one of the constellation fixtures I had commissioned, glowed a fraction brighter than the others. Its placement was subtle above a beam near the center of the space. Inside, the constellation wasn't random. It was Lyra the harp, the symbol I had chosen for balance. No one had ever asked what the stars meant, but I remembered. I had chosen them all. Marco approached me slowly. He didn't speak, just handed me a single white flower tuberose, my favorite, rare to see in evening arrangements. He held it gently as if aware of its weight. "I didn't do this," he said. "I know." He looked toward the lighting panel. "Must have been Chef, or someone else." He hesitated. "Would you like to come inside?" I looked around. People were still frozen mid-toast, unsure whether to smile or wait. The moment didn't belong to them anymore. "No," I said softly. "This is enough." Then I stepped back. I left the flower on a table as I passed. No need to carry it with me. It had already done its work. Outside, the evening air was cooler now. The stars above were real, the constellations not carved in brass, but in sky. I stood beneath them for a moment, listening to the fading strains of the piano, and felt the strange comfort of being part of something no one could fully explain. Let them call it a glitch. Let them wonder if it was planned. Let them try to find the switch. What mattered was that the room had changed. For once, it hadn't centered on Clarissa or Andrew or the curated speeches that skipped names like mine. It had centered on silence, memory, music that didn't ask permission. They had raised their glasses without me, but the lights bowed, and I didn't need a toast when the entire atmosphere shifted in my name. Long before the risotto and the floral candles and the constellation lanterns, there had been a meeting. Just me and two men in gray suits sitting at a glass table that overlooked the coast from 30 stories up. I remember the smell of eucalyptus and the sound of waves muffled by distance. The air conditioning in the conference room was set too low, but I didn't ask them to adjust it. I just folded my hands in my lap and listened to the numbers. "We're prepared to make an offer on the remaining 18% stake," one of them had said. "Silent transfer. You won't be mentioned in the acquisition memo. Standard non-disclosure for 24 months. I had said yes without even blinking, because the offer came from the Langstons, Robert's rivals. Old money, sharper edges. Less charm, more structure. They were everything he'd once accused me of being: precise, calculated, cold. The Langston Group had spent years quietly acquiring undervalued culinary properties across the West Coast. No rebranding, no public takeovers, just strategic buy-ins, usually through silent partnerships. That's what I agreed to. I didn't want headlines. I wanted closure, and a seat quietly behind the curtain. The day the documents were signed, I was asked if I wanted to rejoin the board under my maiden name. I declined. I didn't need a title, just the knowledge that the floorboards still belonged to me in ways no invitation ever could. So when Clarissa's engagement dinner had been announced, hosted at La Belle Marais, written in gold script on ivory cardstock, I had smiled. They didn't know. No one in my family had ever asked who owned the restaurant anymore. They thought I had burned every bridge and vanished. Marla still told stories about how I left over light bulbs, as if she hadn't been the one to suggest I take a sabbatical while the boys sorted things out. What they never knew was that by the time the dinner was confirmed, the reservation had gone through a Langston-owned system. The servers had been briefed on key VIPs. The guest list had been reviewed for sensitivities. And that's why I had been invited. Not by Marla, but by the system I helped design. Marco had known. Chef Andre had known. Robert, if he still had any stake, had chosen to stay away tonight. But no one else noticed. They never think to ask who signs the back of the check. Only who's listed on the front of the menu. Until now. I stepped into the side garden not far from the herb beds. It was quiet there, just the gentle chirp of tree frogs and the rustle of palm fronds overhead. The stone path curved into a crescent bench, the one I used to sit on during late construction nights, with blueprints balanced on my knees. I closed my eyes, and that's when I heard her voice. "Selena?" I turned slowly. Marla stood a few feet behind me, clutching a silk wrap and a clutch bag that looked more expensive than necessary. She wasn't smiling. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "I do now." She hesitated, then walked forward and took the seat beside me, her posture too upright, too rehearsed. For a long moment, she said nothing. "I didn't know the restaurant still kept your recipe," she began. "The risotto? The pear? I thought those had all been removed." "I know." She folded her hands. "I also didn't know they would play that music, or dim the lights, or change the tone of the entire evening without checking with me." She was searching for something. Control, dignity, a reason. "I didn't plan any of that," I said. "But it was for you. I didn't ask for it." Her jaw tightened slightly. "But they did it anyway." I let the silence answer. She looked at me then, not like family, but like a woman trying to understand how she ended up holding the wrong end of a story she thought she authored. "You sold your shares?" she said almost accusingly. "I did, to the Langstons." "Yes." She looked away. "Robert would have hated that. Robert doesn't get a vote anymore." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So, this place? It's theirs now in part, and yours?" I turned my head just slightly, my voice steady. "More than you ever knew." For once, she didn't deflect. She didn't try to paint over it with a joke or a compliment wrapped in judgment. She just nodded slowly. "I see." We sat there in the quiet for what felt like a long time. The distant hum of celebration continued behind us. But the garden was still. Sacred. "Clarissa thinks tonight was perfect," she said. "She doesn't know half of what happened. That's probably best." Marla looked down at her hands, then back at me. "You always were the quiet one." "No," I said gently. "I was the one you never listened to." She didn't argue. When she rose to leave, she turned back once more. "I never thought you'd come back." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped leaving." And with that, she walked away. I sat a moment longer, staring out at the darkened garden, at the lights I had placed, the bench I had chosen, the roots I had nurtured before they were paved over and renamed. They hadn't known the restaurant wasn't theirs anymore. But I had known. And I had waited. I never meant to return to the dining terrace. But my steps carried me there anyway. Not because I had unfinished business, no. That part had ended hours earlier beneath the soft hush of the herb garden, where Marla finally let silence do what her words could not. But something inside me needed to see the room again. Not to reclaim it, just to witness it. One last time. The celebration had thinned. Half the guests had already gone, their laughter trailing behind them like perfume. Clarissa and Andrew stood near the dessert table, posing for one final photograph, her hand resting gently on his chest. There was frosting on her thumb and a smear of lipstick on her glass, both illuminated by the amber glow of the lanterns. I stayed near the fringe, still outside the official party, still unspoken. But this time, I was not trying to disappear. Marco saw me first. He approached with that same linen towel over one arm, his sleeves rolled up, collar open, now that the formality had faded. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "before you go, there's something we'd like to show you." I paused. The staff," he said. "The kitchen, the floor team, even the old maintenance manager. There's something we've kept. And tonight, it felt right." I followed him without a word, my heels clicking softly against the stone floor as we turned a corner into the hallway behind the main dining room. No one else followed. No one needed to. We stopped outside the service corridor that led toward the back kitchens, where deliveries came, where staff clocked in, where I used to stand with blueprints in one hand and coffee in the other. Marco pushed open a discreet wooden door. Inside, the walls had been recently painted, clean matte finish, pale ash gray. But one wall was different. Set in the center under a low spotlight was a framed silver plaque. My name, Selena Brooks, founding visionary La Belle Marais, Esther 2011. Below it, etched in soft cursive, "She built quietly, so we could serve with pride." I didn't speak. Couldn't. Behind me, more footsteps echoed into the hall. I turned to find several staff emerging, line cooks, the original bartender, two hostesses I remembered from the early days. Even the gardener, his cap still tucked under one arm, stood in the back, nodding slowly. One by one they gathered. Marco stepped forward. We kept it off the main floor because we knew they wouldn't understand. But we always knew. Every time someone complimented the ceiling arches or the salt jars or the way the music dipped at dessert, we knew. He looked at me with something steadier than sympathy. "Respect." "You built this?" he said, not past tense, present. In the pause that followed, something happened I did not expect. A voice, low, unsure, rose from behind the crowd. "Wait, is that her?" It was Sloane, Clarissa's future sister-in-law. She had wandered around the corner following someone or something. Her gaze dropped to the plaque, then flicked back to me. "What do you mean she built it?" Marco didn't answer. But the bartender, Gregory Tall and dry-witted, whom I had once hired myself, stepped forward. "She's the one who picked the lighting pattern," he said. "Trained the first two floor managers, helped us redesign the plating line. The risotto hers, the poached pear hers, the mural in the back hers." Sloane blinked. "But I thought she just left." I turned, finally meeting her eyes. "I didn't leave," I said softly. "I was asked to step back, then quietly replaced." She opened her mouth, closed it, then stepped aside as another figure entered the hallway. Clarissa, still in heels, still beautiful, still glowing from the toasts and the candlelight. But her smile faded as she looked around. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing at the plaque. Marco stepped back, and for the first time that night, I stood fully visible. Clarissa looked at me, really looked. Not like the awkward cousin or the missing aunt, but like someone realizing she had hosted an entire evening inside a memory she had forgotten to honor. "You were part of this?" she asked. I held her gaze. I was the first part. The words weren't sharp, just true. She stepped closer, slowly, almost reverently. Then finally, her voice softened. "I didn't know. I know." She reached out, brushed her fingers lightly over the plaque. "It's beautiful. It wasn't meant to be." That made her pause. Then gently she said, "I think tonight was the first time I realized how much I've never asked." "That's how silence grows," I replied, "in all the places where questions should have lived." Behind her, a few more guests trickled into the hallway, the ones who mattered less socially but noticed more often. They read the plaque. They looked at me. Their expressions changed. And in that moment, no one said toast. No one clapped. No one called for a speech. But they turned. They turned toward the one woman the event had tried to place outside. And that was enough. I did not stay for the cake. By the time I stepped back through the main corridor, the terrace had returned to its curated calm. The lights had reset. The music had shifted again, soft, inconspicuous, carefully chosen to ease guests toward their goodbyes. A server carried out a 3-tiered confection covered in sugar pearls and orchids. The kind Clarissa used to swoon over in bridal magazines. People clapped. Someone made a joke about calories. A camera flashed, but I kept walking. I passed the lanterns I had chosen now, burning low with the last warmth of the evening. I passed the arch where Clarissa and Andrew had posed for their photos. Her white jumpsuit slightly wrinkled, his tie already loosened. And I passed the folded napkin I had left hours earlier on the overflow table. It was still there, untouched, like a placeholder for a woman they had no room to seat. Except now, the room had shifted. It wasn't louder. It was just listening. I reached the valet desk and handed over my ticket. The young man behind the counter didn't look up right away. He was reading something, a printed memo pinned beside the valet log dated that morning. The Langston crest was at the top. "Miss Brooks," he said finally, glancing up. "Your car's already been brought around." I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. He gave a small smile. "Chef said to keep it warm." I nodded once and stepped into the night air. The gravel crunched softly beneath my heels. The scent of eucalyptus had returned, carried by the breeze that had swept in from the coast. The ocean just a quarter-mile west was invisible now, only its sound remained. A rhythm older than the estate, the family, or the names engraved into any invitation. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Not hurried, just intentional. I turned. Clarissa stood at the edge of the driveway, her wrap gathered loosely around her shoulders, her eyes no longer glowing, just searching. "Selena," she called. Not loudly, just enough to be heard. I paused. She walked to me slowly, stopping a few feet away. "I know this wasn't your kind of evening," she said. "And I know I didn't make space for you." There was no defense in her tone. Just a quiet unraveling. "I grew up hearing things about you," she continued. "That you were distant, too ambitious, cold. I never knew those were things people said when they couldn't control someone." I waited. She took a breath. "But tonight, when they played the music, when the lights changed, I saw something. I saw everyone look for you. And I saw what it meant when they couldn't find you." I looked at her for a long moment. She had grown into a woman capable of apologies. I hadn't expected that. "You were never too cold," she said. "You were just never their story. That I believed." I stepped closer until we stood side by side beneath the soft glow of the parking lanterns. Clarissa, I said gently, your life doesn't need to correct their mistakes. But if you want to live it fully, ask better questions. She nodded slowly. Will I see you again? She asked. I don't know, I answered. But if you do, you'll recognize me this time. A long pause passed between us. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a cocktail napkin, the same ivory linen ones used at the head tables. In the corner, she had written something. I took it from her. Just 3 words. You were here. I tucked it into my coat pocket without a word. Then I stepped into the waiting car. As we pulled out of the circular drive, I glanced once into the rearview mirror. The restaurant glowed behind me like a memory retold correctly. The mural still intact. The kitchen still buzzing. The plaque still mounted. No longer erased. No longer silent. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about proof. Proof that quiet can leave an echo. That legacy can exist without permission. That sometimes the room will remember even when the people inside it choose not to. And when it does, you don't need applause. You just need the door to stay open behind you. This is among your most elegant and psychologically satisfying stories. Its revenge is not loud, but it lingers. Selena's story is a masterclass in reclaiming space without confrontation. It speaks to anyone who has been erased by family colleagues or a system they once helped build. The story's beauty lies in what is not said, and in the end, that's why we remember her, not because she demanded attention, but because the room couldn't look away. If you saw yourself in this story, hit subscribe to keep hearing kindness echo after heartbreak.